Welcome to the podcast, Restore Yourself, Restore Your Marriage, where it's all about discovering the thoughts that get you in the mood, the thoughts that get you out of the mood, and how creating a deeper connection with yourself creates a deeper connection with your spouse. I'm your coach, Shelly Anderson, coaching you through life, love, and intimacy. This is episode number 96, the Anytime Intimacy Refresher.
All right. Anytime?
Anytime, any place.
That's a good thing to refresh anytime.
Yes. So we are going to talk about some lingering things that we may have held on to, mainly thoughts, ideas, and expectations from our dating days or when we were engaged or newly married that maybe we haven't totally resolved.
Or last week.
Yeah, very true.
Or last month.
Anytime. Month. Yes. And sometimes we don't realize that we have carried those things with us and they still show up in our marriage.
There are things that I do in our intimate relationship that I discover even after being married for 20 years that I'm just like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I do that.
Right.
Or I can't believe you don't like that.
Right.
I thought you liked that.
Yes.
It's amazing how often that happens, and it can be embarrassing and it can be troubling because, after 20 years, I realize for 20 years you've been just living with this. And it can be hurtful, but here's the thing. That's a good thing, right? Like I've had moments when I've realized something like that and I thought, oh my word, I can't believe this is happening. This is terrible. I can't believe it. I'm so embarrassed. I feel shame or whatever. But here's the good news. Now I know.
Yes.
And I don't ever have to do it again, or else I can start doing that thing that I wasn't doing. Whatever it is, now is the time to change. And that's the beautiful thing about being married is we're committed, not just to being together and painfully just dealing with each other.
Right.
We're together to grow and to improve, and we don't have all the answers on day 1 or day 15,000 or day, 20,000.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I love how you're saying that no matter what it's been, because our goal isn't just to survive and get through it, it's to thrive in the marriage. It's to grow, especially on a personal level so that we can grow as a couple. So as we begin and start about this idea of an intimacy refresher, let's remind everybody what the actual definitions of intimacy are, like the main 3. There are so many, but the main 3. The first one is to become familiar. And so that means that from an intimacy and sexual point of view, we've got to be familiar with ourselves. If we don't have like a clear understanding of how a woman achieves orgasm and we think it's the same as a man, that is going to really hinder the intimate and sexual relationship between the husband and the wife. So it is to know that side of yourself and to become familiar with it.
And to become familiar with the others.
Yes.
Right. Just back to the orgasm, if I think that you get to an orgasm the same way I do.
Right. That's going to be a big challenge.
I'm going to treat you the same way I would want to be treated.
Yes.
Thinking that, oh, this is great. This is what she wants. Thinking that it's a good thing.
Right.
And this is, again, becoming familiar. There's such a huge communication aspect to this.
Yes.
You have to talk. You have to say, that doesn't work, or that's what I like, or whatever. It's huge, especially for us men. We need to be instructed. We may think we know what to do. We don't really know.
Well, and I think also when we aren't familiar with that side of ourselves on a deep enough level, we will not communicate. Like, I think It will really hold us back from communicating because we won't know what it is that we do want. And so once we really start to dive into that for our own personal progress and not just only to satisfy our spouse or just out of duty, but actually a true deep understanding for ourselves, that's when we can start to communicate it more clearly.
Now, let me just clarify something, because we're not talking about you need to go start masturbating a lot and, get familiar with yourself. If that's not comfortable for you, if you don't feel like that's the right thing to do, if you feel uncomfortable doing that, I think the better way is just to explore that together. And as you're exploring it together, you're going to discover what you like and what you don't like.
Yeah. Yeah.
And there's not a better way to do it than that.
Yeah, very true. So the second definition is to make known. And this goes along with the first one, but I like this one because it takes it a step further, right? You have to know yourself and this side of yourself first, but then you also have to make it known. So this is like that communication piece. If you can express it to yourself and understand it for yourself, then it becomes much easier to express those things to your spouse and try to say, well, let's make this little adjustment. And then this is so much better. And then the final definition that we want to keep in mind is that intimacy has to do with the deepest and innermost parts of ourselves. And so I think this happens on multiple levels. Not only does it happen with the deepest inner physical part of ourselves, like when we are having intercourse, like we are really getting deep into the body physically. But what else is deep in our lives? We have deep thoughts and deep emotions.
Yeah.
And so being able to know what our own thoughts are about intimacy and even those challenges, and to know what our own emotions are connected to those things and being able to express them, man, we are really getting somewhere when it comes to intimacy.
This is the true intimacy.
Yes.
Because you can have physical intimacy, in quotes, without really getting deep and innermost, right? Because physically, whatever, anyone can do that.
Yeah.
But to be able to get that deep emotionally and psychologically and, really in a loving, connected way, you need to be able to understand those innermost feelings.
Yes.
And to get to those innermost feelings, you have to know the thoughts. Be familiar with your own thoughts and familiar with your lover's thoughts.
Yes.
When you share your thoughts with me, when you are vulnerable and share your thoughts and how they're connected to your feelings with me, it gives me way more to work with than how your body responds.
Yes.
And it actually becomes much more sensual, and it expands that experience beyond what I can even comprehend in my wildest fantasies.
And I think what you're bringing up is such a important point that I think women don't know that us sharing these things actually can make the experience better for you. And I think maybe a lot of men don't know that that's available to them.
Well, I think this is one of the things that I think is important for men. You have to, first of all, be able to get to a place where you're vulnerable. Okay? Because we're taught that we need to be a good lover.
Yes.
We need to be the man. We've got to have game, all this stuff. And we're shown how to do this in the movies, by being like James Bond or something like that, right? Really smooth.
Yeah.
That is absolutely not what we need to be, right? You might be really smooth, but the reason why you're smooth to your wife isn't going to be just because you're handsome and you have nice clothes or whatever. That's going to be a secondary thing. I'm not telling you not to be smooth and nice that way and look good.
Right.
Do your best, right? But if you aren't able to get to that place where you look like Sean Connery, right? I can't get to that place where I look like Sean Connery, but I can do my best that way. But the most important thing for me is to ask really 2 questions. And if I'm asking these questions sincerely and I'm making myself vulnerable by asking them to myself, and maybe at some point asking you, then this is how I get to the deepest, most innermost parts of you. The first question is, how am I a problem for you?
Yes. And I think especially when it comes to intimacy, because if you're asking yourself that, you're going to be genuinely curious about why certain aspects of intimacy are hard for me. And that will open a very different discussion when it comes from a place of curiosity rather than she's not doing what I want when it comes to intimacy. And now I'm angry and now I'm going to ask her about it. Questions from genuine curiosity, I think women would love to answer that because it feels very sincere. It doesn't feel like the superficial level where those things are being discounted, like our thoughts and feelings. But we know we're going to be able to sense that your agenda in asking us is really heartfelt.
And maybe even before I ask you that question, here's an example. I've had times when I felt like you didn't love me, or you weren't attracted to me, or you were annoyed by me because of some way that you were, some sign or signal that you were giving me, like you didn't want to be intimate with me.
Yeah.
Now, I can just make assumptions. Again, back to this assumption that, oh, well, she doesn't want to be intimate with me because she thinks I've gained weight. And look, we all do this, men and women.
Yes.
Okay? I'm not just talking to men, and I'm not just talking to women. We all do this. We're sensitive to how the other, like the person that I care the most about, like I'm 47 years old. I'm at the point now where I don't really care that much what other people think about me.
Right.
That's one of the things I think the 40s gives to you, is you stop worrying about what other people think about you.
Yes.
You kind of shed all that. But the one person I still care about what they think about me is you. I do, and I always will care what you think. But the thing that I've realized is that I make assumptions about how you feel about me when I don't ask.
Yes.
And when I ask myself how I am a problem for you, something that comes up a lot is that, the assumptions I make. When I make assumptions about her, that she isn't attracted to me, or I start to, play the victim card because she's not giving me enough attention. Oh, woe is me, and I'm thinking about myself. Right? It all ties back to me being selfish. That's a pretty big one.
And that's such an interesting one, because I bet we don't think like our own assumptions and the way that will trigger our emotions, and then that will trigger how we behave around our spouse, could be a contributing factor.
Totally, because I'm gonna totally change the way that I act towards you.
Yes.
Based on an assumption of something. And this is also ties into blaming too. So all of a sudden I'm blaming you for something that I don't even know if it's true or not.
Right.
I'm just assuming it. So I can ask that question, how am I a problem for Shelley? Well, right now I'm thinking these things. I'm thinking, well, she's not attracted to me, and she's not interested in me physically. Okay, well, this is thought work. What can I think differently? What might I be missing? How can I think differently? Well, I might think of something that I'm grateful for about you, right? I'm not trying to change your behavior at this point.
Right.
I'm just trying to think about ways I can change my behavior and think about things that I'm grateful for, whether or not you are not attracted to me at this moment or not.
Right.
But as I start thinking through these things, I start opening myself up to new feelings, new thoughts and new feelings. And when those new options start to come in, I have the ability to choose different thoughts. Oh, well, maybe it's just me thinking that. It's not her. I'm going to give her the benefit of the doubt.
Yes.
And I'm going to focus on serving her. And I'm going to focus on the next question. Question number 2, how can I be more helpful to her?
That's a beautiful question.
And so instead of thinking about myself, now all of a sudden, I've already started this process with how am I a problem for her? And as I start thinking about ways that I can be more helpful to you, I'm gonna start thinking new things and feeling new things and behaving in different ways that will now again open me up to new options, give myself more options about how to feel, giving me paths and avenues of newness that all of a sudden can change my whole reality. And I haven't even talked to you yet.
Right. See, that's the beauty of it. That's the beauty of these 2 questions is, again, and this is such a key point with life coaching, you're not out to change other people. Like, you're not out to say, like, to your spouse, I don't like this thing, you have to change it. It's about looking at your own inner process, going through some challenges where you challenge your own thoughts, your own assumptions. And while you do that, you're changing. So your effect on your spouse is going to be different. And then they have a different person to respond to. We always talk about this, and I love it because it's so true.
Now here's the beautiful part about this too, because I've already changed, right? I've already started changing before even talking to you.
Yes.
Now I go to my wife and I say, "Hey, I'm sorry, I've been acting maybe a little distant, and I had these thoughts, and this is the process I went through." And I share that with you. And you don't have to share everything with them.
Yeah.
You can share as much as you feel comfortable with. But as I'm sharing this with you, like you watching me go through this process, that I actually care, and then I'm going through this work. Like when we go through this, that is some of the most intimate time.
Yes.
We haven't even started touching each other yet, or
Right.
kissing or anything. We're just talking.
Yes.
And all of a sudden, we've raised the intimacy level 1,000
Yes.
because we're talking about real things, and I'm being vulnerable. And when you do this for me, I feel the same thing. I feel so grateful that you care enough about me that you're going to do this work.
Yeah.
And you're going to go through this process.
Yes.
And that is the key.
Yeah.
Then whatever happens after that, it doesn't matter, right? It's going to be better than it was before, and it's going to be connected, and it's going to be truly intimate, and it's going to be those innermost parts of us connecting.
Yes. And I think as we've gone through this process several times, even just weekly, we go through this. And the fun and unexpected and exciting thing, and I don't know why I don't expect this to always happen, but it always is so fun, is that when I see you going through this process, it's a huge turn on to me. I am turned on, and I'm like, yes, he is on this journey. He knows these skills, and right now he's using them. And I'm just like, yes, it is awesome. So I think there is something to be said. It doesn't matter if you're not getting it right every time, or you're still struggling through trying to determine, know those deepest parts of your thoughts and feelings and trying to express them. But the effort that I see, and I know that a lot of women like to see from their husbands, is a huge turn on, and it just comes in a way that you don't always expect it to. And so it's very fun. It's very surprising every time. And I'm just always like, yay, I love it. This turns me on.
Well, I'll say one more thing about it. And that is, I actually think that when you do it right in that moment, like the natural thing you might think is, oh, well, now it's go time. We're going to get down. Right. And
Right.
And we're going to make love and all this. You know what? In that moment, that's not necessary.
It's true.
In that moment.
That's true.
That will happen when it happens.
Yeah.
But to be in that place where you feel connected does not require then to have sex right then.
Yes, that's true.
And I say that to men and women because there is amazing sex, and we think about like, oh, that's the most important part of intimacy. It is so not the most important part of intimacy.
Right.
It is part of intimacy. Being connected and being vulnerable and being united with your spouse and both being on the same page as much as possible. And when you're not, coming back and going through that process, that is the best part of intimacy. And now I'm saying, well, sex isn't the end result. Well, no, but I promise you, sex will happen more often, and it'll be much better if you do this.
Yeah.
But I'm not going to tell you when and where that's supposed to happen, because that's up to you. But what we're talking about is the true treasure of intimacy.
Yeah. And I think from a spiritual perspective, we hear scriptures about marriage being a mystery. And I think this is one of the biggest parts of this mystery, is being able to recognize your own thoughts, the negative ones, the ugly ones, the messy ones, all of them, being able to recognize them and say, these thoughts are having an effect on my emotions, therefore how I behave and how this marriage is going. And so I think that's one of the biggest mysteries we want to help uncover for anyone who's listening, is that your thoughts are key.
Yeah.
Your thoughts are key. So we're just going to go through a few more things that a lot of couples, before they get married, have certain ideas in their mind about how marriage is going to go, about how intimacy is going to go. And we want to just bring them back up to the forefront to say, hey, did you ever address these?
Mm-hmm.
Or are they still lingering? Right?
We'll go quickly through these.
Yeah. So whatever experiences you've had with intimacy so far, don't judge all of sex or intimacy based on those. Because especially in the beginning, sex was probably pretty awkward and messy and did not go how we envisioned in our minds, right? We probably had some type of expectation of how that was supposed to go. And so what we want to offer instead is that there's so much more ahead. Like, what does the future look like for you in your intimate relationship? And don't judge what the future can be based on the past or how things have been going currently. They can always improve. It can always get better.
Especially when you apply the first half of what we just talked about to this.
Yes. And going along with that, I think we really need to let go of any specific expectation we have for our intimate encounter. Like, orgasm doesn't have to be the goal every time.
No.
And I think once we can let go of that expectation and say, hey, for tonight's experience, do I want to have an orgasm? Or maybe I want to explore this other side of myself that is like increasing my physical arousal. I want to really focus on that in tonight's experience. And so you don't have to have the expectation of only orgasm.
Can I say this for men too?
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be the expectation for men either.
Right.
It doesn't.
Right.
We always think about whether you have an orgasm or not in terms of the woman, and with old men who have like erectile dysfunction.
Mm-hmm.
The pressure of having an orgasm for both is real.
It is.
You're going to have pressure, and there's going to be times when, for whatever reason, you're just not able to. And what's the last thing you want to do just to have an orgasm? Just start pounding your wife, right? Just to have one, or to go faster or harder. It doesn't. Just take a breath.
Yeah.
Take a breath. If you're not going to have an orgasm, it's okay. And I'll tell you why. Because all that energy, all that sexual energy that you're about to release, if you don't release it this time, it's going to stay with you.
Yes.
And you'll be able to take that with you into your relationship. And you'll be able to still feel a little bit, energetic that way. You're not just going to be like, oh, I'm done. I'm going to go to sleep now. Okay? You don't have to have an orgasm every time, guys.
Yes. And it's so good to be able to let that expectation go and not think, well, I have to go into this experience just because we've got to get to the orgasm. I think when we do that and have that as like, that's the main point, that's the main goal, we lose sight of the whole experience as a big, it's like an all-encompassing experience. And we can lose sight of that if we only focus on like one goal. So we can release that. We can release the expectation that is the goal and say, let's look at the whole experience and enjoy all of it.
And just one more thing.
Yes.
If your wife will come first.
Yes.
And always, that is a sexual innuendo, but it's also just in general. If you can put her first and she comes first, whether you get to that point or not is up to you. But those moments when you put her first and she's what matters and you don't matter, there's something really special about that at times. I'm not saying every time.
Yeah.
But there's something amazing about that. And then when you don't finish and you maintain that energy and you show her that you can put her above yourself, that's game.
Yeah, that is game. That is game. There's no doubt about that. Okay, going on to the next one. I think most people, when they are taught in elementary school or junior high and they're learning about the reproductive system, they are not taught this key factor. And that is this. The brain is the first sex organ, right? We learn all the labels of the body parts, but we're not taught that the brain is the first sex organ. And this is key because what we teach makes all the difference in the world. If your thoughts are not right, let's say at 10 o'clock p.m. and all the kids are in bed and things have like seemed pretty good between you and your spouse that day, like things could go either way, your thoughts are going to be the first sex organ. If your thoughts are not in the right place, man, it's going to be so much harder to even want to be intimate, so we cannot discount this. We need to re-educate, and that's the point of this podcast, is educate everyone correctly that the brain is the first sex organ. So if we can think about that, wow, what a game changer as we think about our spouse and how the day is going and as we think about intimacy.
I think that's an easy thing for guys to realize because because we start thinking thoughts and we can quickly do that. That's not necessarily the same thing. And we shouldn't assume that our wife, just because she sees us in our like sexy silky pajamas, all of a sudden she's turned on.
Well, and I think you're bringing up a really good point too, because I think men are very visual, and this is well established. But your thoughts, I think, are probably much more connected to visual images.
Yes.
Where a woman's thoughts are not like that. They're very logical. They're very like put together with lots of meanings behind them. It's much more different. It's not as visual.
So my point is, the brain. It's easy for men to understand that the brain is the first sex organ, but it's not this. It doesn't have the same functionality,
right,
necessarily as the woman. So your point just needs to be, I guess, the disclaimer is that yes, our thoughts have a lot to do with it, but it's not just the visual.
Yes,
it's a lot deeper than that. And for the men who go through this process, you're going to become less and less visual as you evolve through this process, even though the visual will always be there. And you're not going to shake the visual. Like, you're going to see something and it's going to turn you on at times.
Yeah.
But the emotional part of it will become more and more important to you. But that needs to be developed.
Yes.
That's something that your wife probably already has. And so it's something that you need to learn together again.
Yes. So thoughts matter significantly when it comes to intimacy for both the husband and the wife. And because they trigger our emotions. And so what we have discovered with our clients is that the husband usually has the higher desire and the wife has a less desire. And then she feels like something is wrong with her, when actually it's very normal if you think negative thoughts about your spouse or about how he didn't help, that it's very normal that you're not going to feel a desire for intimacy. It's totally normal. It's predictable. But they don't know that sequence yet. And so it feels like something is wrong. I am broken. No, your thoughts matter and they totally trigger your emotions. And so if you're having negative emotions, your body is not going to be craving the penis. Okay. The next one has to do with high stress. And I'm sure when we were engaged and dating, we did not think about high stress because we probably weren't feeling a lot of high stress.
Different stress, maybe, but not the same as being married and having kids and jobs and bills and, letters from creditors and, the end of the world on our minds.
Right. And so if we have a lot of stress mentally, we are definitely going to have it emotionally. And that creates a physical reaction where our muscles will actually be more tense, even if we're not thinking about that and being observant about our muscles. And so let's say we go to make love. If I've had a lot of stress, I'm not paying attention, but my muscles are tightened. And so that makes the actual physical part of having an orgasm more challenging. So again, I'm going to be like, something's wrong with me. It's not easy for me to get to the orgasm, and I might not realize it's just that I've been running on a high stress, and so my muscles cannot relax.
Can I just say this? Just men, you don't have this problem because when we're stressed, we can still have an orgasm.
Right.
And in fact, sometimes when we're stressed, that's all we want is just
go to that. You go to
it.
Yeah.
For women, and I'm speaking generally, this is all science says, right? This is why foreplay is so important before intercourse, for women especially.
Yeah.
If there's any day that you just make an assumption that your wife is not stressed, you're probably wrong.
Right.
Right? Unless you're like on vacation and everything's handled and you know for a fact that there's no stress. Okay, that's one thing. But when you come home from work or you're gone and you come home and you don't know what's been going on and you obviously haven't had time to talk and you don't know what's going on in her head, just assume that there's plenty going on in her brain.
Yeah.
And there's plenty that she's stressed about. And it probably doesn't have anything to do with you. Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. But don't assume, like I said earlier. But take time to connect again. The brain, one of the best ways to open up the brain is to talk and to be curious and ask questions. Start there.
Yes.
Don't just come in and like rip your shirt off and say, okay, baby, it's time. Let's go. Because then you're going to, she might be like, okay, I need it too. And she might want it. And she's so stressed, she wants to have sex too. And that stress is a reliever for women too.
Yes.
But what she might not realize is that, oh my goodness, all of a sudden she's having a hard time having an orgasm. And so you're like, what's wrong?
Yeah. And she's still trying to figure out the problems,
right?
Solving the problems from earlier in the day.
Yeah. So I think it's one good way to refresh intimacy is just to commit to connecting mentally and emotionally, no matter what, first, before you go into the physical. And when you go into the physical, take some time, because we should just both assume that there's some stress and there's some things that need to be worked out. And we can do that through massage and taking our time and kissing and hugging and being close and being connected. And then once you get to that point, then let nature take over, right? Like, just let it happen. But what we can do is really pay attention to the mind.
Yes.
And then the heart, and then everything else. And if we do that, we will have better experiences. And that doesn't have to take 2 hours.
No.
Right? It can take 10 minutes. It depends on the circumstance. But I've found that when I just assume that there's always something that needs to be worked through before we get to that place, it's always a better experience. And then you don't have to like make up for bad sex.
Right.
When you have a letdown because your expectations aren't met.
Yes. And I think going along with that this is one that you and I love to promote, is lubrication is important. And the female body, it's meant to lubricate. But women will lubricate at all different levels, all different amounts, all different degrees, even different times during each month.
Yeah.
It's variable. It changes. And so because it's something our body does naturally, and there are going to be times where even if we are very turned on, that maybe it's just physically and chemically, like our body is not in that stage where it's producing a lot of that lubrication, it's needed. And it is obviously one of the best kept secrets, according to Cosmo magazine.
And every other magazine that pretends to be sex experts.
Yes. And it's so key because this is something our body naturally does. And I've talked to a lot of clients who that's a hard step for them to go and buy lubrication. They almost feel like it's naughty or it's taking it to a level that they don't want to. And I'm like, no. Our bodies do this naturally. You're helping it out.
Guys, buy a little bottle of lubrication, have it in your dresser next to your bed or whatever. And the first thing you should never do, this is a master class kind of point, and it's so simple. Don't assume because your wife isn't moisturizing herself naturally that something's wrong.
Right.
If you think that, oh, well, she's not wet. That's what a lot of people use those words nowadays, but that's something that is pretty practical too. She's not wet.
Yeah.
It's not your fault. And if she's not, then maybe take a step back and take some more time. But even if you feel like she's ready to go and you're ready to go and you've done all the steps and she's still, just pull out a little lube and just apply it.
Yeah.
You don't even have to say anything. Just do it.
Yes.
And she might know that you're doing it. She might not know. But I promise you, if you just do that, just assume that she's going to need a little help there. That's okay.
Yes.
That's been okay for people from the beginning of time, right? And then the after effect, the during effect, all of it is going to be so much better. And even if she is, quote, wet, still use some.
Yeah.
It doesn't hurt. It's not going to hurt anybody, and it will always help no matter what. So I guess my pointer to you guys is just assume that she's going to need a little help, whether or not she seems like she does or not. And at times, maybe she's not going to, and you're not going to have it with you. And, there's other ways to help her to be, helped along. And this might seem gross to some people, but, you might use a little spit and put it down there. But I think the practical point here is that, we have bodies that have needs, and there's going to be very practical things that need to be worked through. And that's just after all the other emotional stuff. But don't assume that she's not moisturizing herself so she doesn't want you.
Right.
I'm just adding the kind of the male side to what you're saying.
Yes. And I think an important point to also address going along with this is that if perhaps you haven't used lubrication before and sexual intercourse still hurts physically, and not only can that help, but if it hurts physically, there's no doubt that she is going to be hurting emotionally as well as mentally. So it's not that there can never be discomfort, but once you've been married, making sure that the discomfort level is as low as it can be, I think is an awesome goal.
I agree. And for the guy too, because if you feel like you're hurting your wife, it's not going to help you. You're going to feel bad, and then you're going to wonder what's wrong. I think this is probably one for people who are more newly married too, because once you've been married a while and you've had intercourse a lot, you know this kind of the signs of when it hurts, and you as a male, you've seen what it looks like on her face when it's hurting, and you can stop and ask and take your time and slow down and maybe try something different, right? I think this is all about listening and communicating. And if you're doing that, whether you've been married 40 years or 4 days, it's all going to lead to a more intimate experience. And then get rid of the expectations of orgasm, get rid of the expectations of whether or not she's wet or he's hard enough, or, all these things that they're all distractions. The process of going through this together as a connected couple, that is where the intimacy is.
Yes.
And if you can focus in on that process and that journey together, whether it's good or bad, if you're both being selfless in that moment, it will make your marriage that much closer. Even those bad experiences can bring you closer together. And that is why marriage is so much better than not being married and having intimate relationships.
That's right.
It takes it to a completely different level. I don't care how great of a lover you are. If you're not married, you have no idea how great sex can be.
Yeah, it's true. All right, we're going to wrap things up with one or two more points. And the last one is, or second to the last one is that for most women, orgasm comes from clitoris stimulus. And it's amazing how many women I have talked to who have been married for a really long time that still don't know this. And that's okay, right? It's not your fault. Very much we're lacking in education about the female orgasm. And so they're, going through the sexual experience with their spouse, with their husband, and they don't even realize the point of the clitoris. And so they're trying to achieve orgasm mainly through penetrative sex, and they're wondering why it's not happening for them. And I think this is just one of those things. It's one of those mysteries that a lot of people don't talk about, but that is a key factor, mainly for women, for most women, that their orgasm is coming from clitoris stimulus.
It is for us.
So this is we've got to know this. Women have got to know this about themselves.
I'll straight up tell you, it's pretty rare that Shelly will have an orgasm while we're just having sex.
Yeah. I don't know if I've ever just from that.
There's all kinds of, methods that you can use to stimulate the clitoris while you're having sex. And there's women out there that can orgasm without clitoral stimulation. But the studies for the last, 100 years that have been measuring this, mostly any kind of orgasm for the woman is going to come from clitoral stimulation. And if you're not having an orgasm just during sex and you need clitoral stimulation, there is no reason at all to feel bad about that.
That's what it's meant for.
The beauty is, now you know how she's going to have an orgasm.
Yes.
And you figure out how to do that. And it's awesome. And it's actually a lot more intense.
It's very intense. Yes. The last one I think is a great one to end on, and that has to do with humor. Mm-hmm. It's having a playful attitude. It's being able to relax these expectations and say, oh my gosh, we're getting it wrong tonight, or things are just not lining up, or things are awkward or clumsy tonight. There are times where we've bumped heads, in the middle of a session or whatever. When you can allow yourself to be playful and humorous and to find the funniness of things, even in the awkward moments, it can really take that stress level down. It helps you connect in a completely different way during the process and can really enhance the intimacy between husband and wife.
How many times have I farted during sex or some weird sound happens, right?
Yes.
We don't do this to not be gross about some things because it's just real. If you're married and that hasn't happened to you, well, it will someday. And there's, it's embarrassing when it first happens, and, do your best to not do it. But if something like that happens, whatever. Again, back to, this is your marriage. You're together. You're one, and things like that are going to happen. And there's all kinds of things that can happen when you're that close to somebody.
Yeah.
And so if that happens, you just got to laugh about it. And, there's no reason to feel ashamed or to worry about it. It's kind of cute in ways, because you're like, wow, this person is so vulnerable. And we have to remember how vulnerable we are to each other.
Yes.
There's no one else in the world that we're this vulnerable to.
Especially in those positions, and we're sharing our naked bodies with each other.
Yeah. And so I actually think it's awesome, but it can be embarrassing. But look, we will be the fall guy for anybody, right? Been there, done that, and we're still in love.
Yes.
Because we realize that these things just happen, and that's part of the beauty of being one with somebody else.
That's right. So I think that's a really good one to end on. There's definitely some more, and maybe we'll talk about them in a different podcast, but I think these ones are really good to help us keep a perspective of this refreshing and this renewal of intimacy, and just that reminder of what true intimacy really is. And if we have been holding on to any of these negative thoughts or negative assumptions or expectations, it's time to let those things go. And hopefully this podcast has given you some really good ideas of exactly how to do that, with some new ideas of how to think about things right now and moving forward. There's so much hope. There's so much on the other side of doing the thought work that comes with this. Any final thoughts?
No, I love you, and I love being able to help people, whether they need it or not. We all just need to be open to the journey.
Yes.
And that's what makes marriage great.
That's right. So if you know of anybody who might be struggling with something like this, please share this podcast with them. They can just listen for 30 minutes, and it may be just what they're needing. So remember, the more you restore this type of intimacy with yourself, the more you can restore it with your spouse. Thanks so much for listening today, and we hope you will join us again next week.
Bye.